And we're live. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful day. It is Friday, June 24th, 2022. And today we're talking about the new 13-inch M2 MacBook Pro. Is it worth it? Is it new enough? Do people need it? Do people want it? These are the questions we're trying to answer. We're going to talk about some more product rumors, and Captain America's iPhone makes an appearance. I am your host, Luke Filipowicz. Welcome to the iMore Show. I have three fabulous guests with me. As always, we have iMore contributor Karen Freeman. How you doing, Karen?
I'm doing all right. How about you?
Not too bad. Excited to get this week going. Our news editor, Stephen Warwick. How you doing, Stephen?
Hello, I'm well, thank you. Hot, but managing.
Yeah, it's warm. It's warm in here in Canada. Apparently, it's warm in the UK. And we have another person from the Queensland, as I like to call it. Gerald Lynch has joined us finally. He is iMore's newest and new editor-in-chief. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Gerald. We've been wanting
Thank you for finally having me.
Yeah, we've been wanting to introduce you to the folks. How you you've only been with iMore like a few weeks now, but how are you liking the new digs?
Well, you tell me. Am I settling in okay? I feel like I'm doing okay. Nothing's burnt down yet, so
Yeah.
that to me is a plus.
Well, you certainly hit the ground running by representing us at WWDC. That was great.
Yeah, our very first mission for Gerald, his very first day working for iMore, we sent him to the California sun to bake outside in Cupertino as WWDC. How was that experience, by the way? How did you like going?
As the pastiest, whitest man alive, putting me in like Californian sun for like 2 straight hours without any kind of shade. I thought, well, I mean, baptism of fire in like the most literal sense. No, it was great though. It was great. It was a really lovely opportunity as well. They've got a fantastic, crazy campus to like explore, and it was really cool opportunity to have a look at all that stuff.
Yeah, and we certainly appreciate your presence there. You did get us a little hands-on review of the M2 MacBook Air that they had announced. But what we're talking about this week is actually the 13-inch MacBook Pro, which also has an M2, which you had a chance to review and have been using now for a little while. And what's your general opinions? Just to start off, what's your general opinion?
I mean, it's a 13-inch MacBook Pro, right? And in every single way that you are already familiar with a 13-inch MacBook Pro, except for its internals, right? So it's still a really lovely machine. It's really beautifully put together, but it was really beautifully put together for the last few years that it's been out, right? Other than like its new internal structure. I think it's a really difficult machine to judge on its own merits at the moment, knowing that the MacBook Air redesign is around the corner, which will obviously have the same chipset and stuff. So yeah, it's in an interesting position for Apple. And I know like earlier today, we tweeted to see how many people have picked them up, right? And
the answer was 0.
Yeah. It's going to be a difficult machine to kind of, well, I was going to say it's going to be a difficult machine to sell, but the 13-inch MacBook Pro, according to Apple, is the second best selling laptop in the world, right? So it's a really popular format as well, and sort of like design style. So there's a degree of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But you know, even the best made house needs a fresh lick of paint every few years, right? So yeah.
I feel like this is the kind of product like the iPhone SE that people don't rush out to get, but when they actually need a replacement for their computer, this is one that's a popular option.
Yeah. It's ever since they announced it at WWDC, we talked about it a bit and just kind of talked about how it does seem to be a weird product in their lineup now, because you have the Mac, like the 14-inch and the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which has like an updated design. Obviously, it's on a slightly older chip, but it's also the M1 Pro and the M1 Max, so it's different than just the basic, M2 as this would be. And it doesn't have. It still only has the couple USB-C ports. It has a touch bar, which never seemed to be that popular of a feature, but I know that there are some diehard fans out there who really do love the touch bar. If you have apps that really make use of it, you might miss it. So this is another opportunity for you to upgrade. But it does just kind of seem like maybe Apple's got some stock that they're trying to get rid of, at least in terms of the chassis, and then they just kind of switch out the chip and hope that it push it out and hope that it finds the right people. It's an odd choice. It's an odd choice in their lineup.
It's weird, isn't it? I was thinking of, sorry, Joe. I was just gonna say when I saw, I think Renee made a video about this and talking about how, like, who's this for? Well, it's great for people who are just about to buy the M1 MacBook Pro, and now all of a sudden, well, hey, here's 20% extra performance and stuff, and I'm pretty sure they start at the same price because Apple we discontinued the M1 version. But as kind of Karen and you guys have said, I can't help thinking, like, if I was in an Apple store and like someone came in, like especially like a student with back to school coming, which we'll talk about in a bit and things, I would just be telling them all to wait for the MacBook Air. So it was like, yes, it was a perfect, oh, you're about to buy the M1 MacBook Pro. Well, why not get the M2? It's like a little bit better in terms of chip performance, but then it's like, well, why would you not wait and just kind of make the extra MacBook Air step? Strange.
Yeah, but I think there are a lot of people that just quote unquote always buy a MacBook Pro. Like that's their computer, and they buy one every 3 to 5 years or whatever it is. And they don't necessarily want to spend the money that the 14 and the 16.
Ollie in our office,
they just want a smaller.
Ollie in our office made a good point this week as well, that a lot of people who buy the Pro, Karen, like you said, they just want a MacBook Pro, but they can't actually, not necessarily can't afford the actual MacBook Pro, the 14 or the 16-inch version with the big spicy chips. But they want the Pro name on it, and actually they also don't need the Pro power for massive video edit and photo editing, Final Cut, Logic, whatever workflows and stuff like that. But they just want like a bit of extra boost, and to be able to kind of to say it's the MacBook Pro.
It's almost a status symbol in a small way, right? It's like, oh, it's like going into the restaurant and buying the cheapest bottle of wine, right? You go for the second cheapest bottle of wine, right? Like that's what like the 13-inch Pro kind of is. Because I mean, if you're the sort of person who genuinely needs like a portable creative workstation, 13 inches of screen isn't enough, so what are you really doing with it, right? Like you'd go for I don't know, maybe the Mac Studio or something if you need something like at home or whatever. But in terms of a portable machine, you need more screen real estate, right? So even the 14-inch is kind of on the cusp of what would be acceptable, I think, to many creatives. But then at least you've got the chip upgrade, right? So the real MacBook Pro is the 16-inch, right? Like it's got the chip, it's got the screen, and it has like
new design as well.
New design, right?
Been updated more recently. Yeah.
But
it's also quite expensive.
It is very
outside of the
right?
realm of most people's.
But that comes back to the sort of cheapest bottle of wine situation, right? Like, I guess like if you're like a casual consumer, you go into the Apple store, you've got maybe a little bit more money in your pocket. You're like, oh well, I guess the MacBook Air ain't as good, right? Because it's not the Pro. Even though, especially this generation, what we're seeing this year, like the divide is going to be tiny between like the Air and the 13-inch Pro.
To keep digging into the wine analogy, the only difference in wine that I can tell is I can distinguish red and white. So like I would be and there will be some people who just would not know the difference between the 13-inch MacBook Pro and the 14 and the 16-inch, aside from the size, obviously, because they're in the name. That's what that's what you're kind of getting at. I think that this one is for. So, Rose, I could detect Rose as well, probably a push.
Yeah,
Rose is
when I worked at the Apple
in this situation.
Yeah.
When I worked at the Apple store, I worked through a back to school season, and there were two sort of very distinct groups of people coming in to buy their computers for college. And there was like the kid that would come in with mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, and they would be like, we want a MacBook Pro. Which one should we get? And then there was another group that was like often a young person coming in by him or herself, or maybe with a friend. And I remember one in particular, he got this was when the non-retina screens were kind of being phased out, but there was still one MacBook Air that didn't have retina. And I would
the
always
fat
steer
book
people away
slow.
from buying it.
Yeah.
What?
We used to call it the fat book slow where I worked.
Yeah.
Still had
So
the
I would
CD
always steer
drive.
people away. I would always steer people away from buying it. But this one young man came in, and I mean, it almost made me cry. He came in with it was $850 because that's how much it cost with the education discount, in like small bills that he had collected over the course of the past year from like tips at his job. And I was like, this anyway, consider, buying a different. He's like, no, this is the one I have the money for. And he paid for it with those like $1 and $5 bills.
The saddest thing about that whole story is the carry handle that the box came with that Apple phased out for every other model, but that one just had the black, the plastic, so that you could take it out of the store in shame, I guess, and everyone could see. Oh.
Yeah, and something to talk about too, like Gerald just mentioned that the kind of the difference between the MacBook or the MacBook Air, the new M2 MacBook Air, and the 13-inch M2 MacBook Pro is kind of getting slimmer and slimmer, and they're only $100 apart now from starting configurations too. So because MacBook Air M2 got a price bump of like almost $200, which is a little unfortunate.
I think you can
but
if you up the M2 spec to have the same number of GPU cores, they're the same price. They're the same price machine.
Yeah.
So, and
it'll be interesting. We don't really have benchmarks in Gerald's review, which if you want to check out his entire thoughts of what he thought about the M2 MacBook Pro with 13-inch, definitely go check that out on iMore. But he did put in some benchmarks, some Geekbench benchmarks, and we don't have any haven't been able to compare it to the M2 MacBook Air because that is not out yet. But I am curious to see how it performs, because you would expect it should perform a little less because there isn't a fan and there isn't quite as much room in the MacBook Air. And what we know from the M1 was the MacBook Air M1, which was a great machine, but it definitely was still like of the MacBook. The M1 generation, that was the one that performed a little less, and it has a lot to do with the thermals and the cooling ability.
And you would assume, right, that like if you're going to be doing anything sort of under sustained load, right, you're doing some like video editing projects or like a big like Logic Pro project or what, something like that, right, where you're pushing especially like 3D work, where you're pushing the chip a little bit further, that the Pro should perform better over time, right? Like you've got the active cooling to keep the chip cooler, whereas the MacBook Air is just not going to have that. But again, it comes back to like the user. Like, I wonder how many people buying the Pro are really ever going to like put it to work, like at which case, like maybe it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter if it has sustained load. I mean, again, this is an assumption, right? So we'll be clear that it's an assumption, but like that the majority of people using it never put it under the load that it's capable of, at which point you go for the Air with its extra port and it's
Yeah, and something I always talk about with people when, people especially since getting this job, but even just before when I was a bit of a techie myself, and people would ask specifically about Apple products, but sometimes general products too, just like, asking my opinion because they know I kind of work in the industry about like what to get or whatever. And I was like, I would mention stuff that like that, there's things like, okay, well, how much are you actually going to push this machine? But something that to keep in mind is like, just because you don't push a machine, like people want to buy a machine that works for them and works fast, right? Like they don't want a machine. It's one of the reasons why is, like Chrome, we all know that Chrome is a horrible, horrible RAM hog. But the reason why Chrome is a horrible, horrible RAM hog on your machine is because it wants to use all that RAM to be as fast as possible. And people get mad at it sometimes because sometimes it does get a little overbearing, but like, you want that web page to load. You want your programs to launch instantly. You want your, you know, your whatever you're working on to just like work and to be not stressful and not have to take time out of your day, because time is money, if you want to put it that way. So I understand where, like, you know, some people will always say, like, why are people buying, you know, pro versions of devices that they don't need? And it's like, well, yeah, sure, maybe they don't push it to its absolute limit, but everything that they're doing is happening like instantaneously, and that can be like a huge boon for anybody, especially if you're upgrading from an older device.
It's also really important for future proofing as well. It's going to give you years maybe in terms of the distance that you can take that machine on software updates and use it into the future, because it's not like the iPhone that you maybe buy or upgrade every 1 or 2 years. When someone forks out $900,000 more on a Mac, they expect to have it for 4, 5, 6, 7 years even. I still have a Mac I bought in 2014, I think, that will still go the distance if I need it to. So
I wrote for the site the other day that, like, I've still got my my 2012 original Retina MacBook Pro. Like, it works, right? It does a really good job still, except for the fact that, you know, it's kind of hamstrung now by the fact that it doesn't have later OS software support, you know. But I spec'd that out to be like the king of laptops that year. And here it is, like 10 years later, it's sitting under my desk now. If I wanted to go on there and, you know, browse some web, write a document, I wrote a book on it, like it still works, you know. So there is something to be said about that maxim of, like, buy what you can afford now, because it will pay itself forward in the future. And there's an argument to be made in that respect, maybe for the Pro. Like, you know, if you're say you're a student who is looking to get into a creative industry, you know, maybe going for the Pro now with the idea that you might need to do some more sustained workloads later on in its lifespan, maybe it is the right machine to buy right now, you know. But I think you do have to really think carefully about what you're going to use it for if you're going to be spending that much money.
I wonder if the new Air might surprise us. Like you said about, you know, waiting for the benchmarks for the new Air to come out. I wonder if we'll be pleasantly surprised, to the credit of the MacBook Pro, as to how much better it is with the cooling and with the sustained performance. So I wonder if Apple is hoping that, because it's hard to differentiate them in other ways. So I wonder if Apple is hoping that once we have our hands on the M2 MacBook Air and you can kind of compare the two like for like, there'll be a market kind of difference to say, oh, hey, look, actually, there is a really, you know, key significant performance advantage in buying this M2 Pro over the Air. Yes, you're not getting the new design and the FaceTime camera, but, you know, a few kind of, you know, numbers on the Geekbench or whatever, it could really make a difference. So I wonder if we're maybe overestimating how well the M2 MacBook Air does with those kind of thermal limitations. And like Gerald said, the fact that it comes with the 2 less GPU cores, isn't it? Not CPU, that it's 8 and 8 instead of 8 and 10. So we'll have to see what happens when the Air comes out.
Yeah, and a lot of what we're talking here is assumption, right? Like, so I have held the MacBook Air. I've had, you know, a little space of time to play with it at the WWDC show, but, you know, it's not like a full test, right? So what we're going on at the moment is the sense of, like, aesthetic difference that we appreciate. A slightly bigger screen, you've got the MagSafe port, but in terms of its actual real world performance, I've looked at someone else's Photoshop project, you know, and opened a few tabs. You know, it wasn't like we were really
exhaustive.
Yeah, exactly, right. So there could be lots we'll find out. I think one thing to keep in mind as well is that, like, where I think maybe the Air does stand a chance, even in sustained workloads, is how power efficient the M2 is. Like, it's doing a lot before it even starts to really get dangerously hot, you know? So I think from that point of view, like, what they're doing with the silicon right now is crazy. Like, how cool it could. So I'm on. I think this is like my work laptop. So I think it's a 2018 Pro. It's an Intel chip anyway. It's not really done anything too busy today. And if you were sat in the room with me, you'd think I had like a Dyson fan sitting next to me, right? Those fans are kicking in, right? Whereas you go anywhere near one of the M1 chips even, and definitely on the M2 of like the 13-inch Pro, it was near silent when I was doing my day-to-day stuff. So in that respect, I think if that efficiency carries through to the Air without the cooling fans, who knows how big a difference there's going to be in performance? Maybe not that much.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we noticed with the M1 chips as well, was that like, yeah, technically if you benchmark it and you put it through its paces, yes, the M1 MacBook Air was a little less efficient than like the M1 iMac or even the M1 Mac Mini, which actually had the best performance. The Mac Mini actually had the best performance of the M1s originally, just because there's more space, right? There's more space, and it just has a bit of a better, cooling features, or a bit of a cooling apparatus. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but
has fans, Luke, is what you're.
Yeah, well, I don't think does the Mac Mini have fans? I
it has like one big.
Oh, okay.
Fan.
Okay, I couldn't remember, but yeah. So, but then, yeah, as Gerald was saying, at the end of the day, like it's a couple numbers on a Geekbench score. It's not really necessarily going to make a difference unless you're really trying to push it as much as you can. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting. I think raising the price of the MacBook Air now, because now it's $11.99, I believe, is what it starts at, American, instead of like what the MacBook Air has like faithfully started at forever. It has been like $9.99, and they kept around the M1 MacBook Air at $9.99. But part of me wonders if they like did that so that there wasn't as stark of a difference between the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air in terms of the 13-inch anyways, in terms of price. Because like if the M2 MacBook Air was $9.99, I would definitely probably, although I don't have one and I haven't tried one, I'd probably be like, most people probably could just get that, and that would be like, you'd be saving yourself like $300 and would probably be relatively pretty close to the performance that the M2 MacBook Pro would be. But now that like there is only that like $100 difference, like maybe it's worth to jump up and just get that little bit of extra oomph when you need it, right? And then you have, if you have a few other options if you need, I guess.
I think that's probably intentional. Sorry, Charles, to say like, if it was like, it's almost a no-brainer going for the Air over the Pro. If there was a $200 price difference, I don't think like there would even be a conversation to have. If it was a $9.99 M2 Air, like I don't know. Apple probably wouldn't have even bothered with a 13-inch Pro, to be honest.
There's a psychological kind of benefit to that $9.99 price, right? Like once you hit that fourth digit, you start thinking twice about things. So it'd be interesting to see like whether we'll ever see its like again.
Yeah, I'm also curious at like, how, Gerald, you mentioned at the top, near the top of the show, that Apple has said that the 13-inch MacBook Pro has actually been like a really big seller for them. And so it makes me wonder, like, if this finds the right people, which I'm assuming it will, the people who want this, I'm assuming will get it. If they've been waiting for it or whatever, whether it's like touch bar enthusiasts or just, people who really want that more portability or whatever have you. Maybe they like the old form factor even better than the new one. I'm not sure. But like, if this is the machine for you and you're going out there and you're buying this and Apple sees that, I'm curious, like, how much longer does it stick around? Like, is this just now their new like cheap Pro machine? Is it going to be in their lineup for a while? Are we going to see an M3, MacBook Pro 13-inch? Are we going to see an M4 MacBook Pro 13-inch? I wonder, like, or is this what we're all expecting and they're just trying to get rid of some old chassis they have sitting around in the warehouse somewhere?
I think there's a really interesting thing to be made. Like, if you do like the touch bar, this is probably your last chance, right? This is probably the end of the road for that design and that bit of hardware. So, I mean, again, a lot of it is based on assumption, but we kind of, you can see that the writing's on the wall from like what's happening with the 14-inch and the 16-inch, right? Which are like really lovely machines. And there's always been a little bit of criticism to the touch bar in terms of even Apple's general support of it, let alone like third-party support. But if you're enamored with that, like, this is kind of it, right? You've got to go for it, because it's probably never coming back. So I guess there's a stay of execution in that respect, that maybe that's it. Maybe Apple's just said, there's about 1,000 people who really love this touch bar. We'll let them have one more go at it, and then we'll just put it to pasture. But
yeah, it definitely certainly seems like the touch bar is last hurrah, I suppose. And I always thought that the touch bar was a cool idea. I've never actually used one. I've never had the opportunity to actually use one. I always thought it was a cool idea, but it was kind of one of those. It was one of those rare things that Apple like launched, but then didn't really support a ton. Probably because I guess maybe it was perceived as a flop right away. I'm not sure. It kind of reminds me of like 3D Touch. Everyone remember 3D Touch, which did have its uses, and don't get me wrong, but like Apple never really seemed to go out of their way to really tell anybody what those uses are. They were just like, oh, click on your app and then you can do a couple different things depending on the app or whatever. Like, they never really put what seemed like a lot of like thought into it, which Apple typically does with its its software and its hardware. It doesn't usually do things, like halfly. It usually does things all the way. So I always thought that the touch bar was a really interesting concept, but it never seemed to really make it to the point of where I thought maybe it could have been actually really useful for a lot of people. It seemed like it was really niche based on, what apps you use that actually take advantage of it. So it would have been, I don't know, it was a cool idea. I like the idea of having a second screen. There's other Windows laptops that have, done stuff like that, and it's interesting and it's new and it would be fresh. But the touch bar was not long for this world, unfortunately. I think
it's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it? It's like, well, why did the touch bar flop? And it's like, well, because Apple didn't support it very well. And it's like, well, why didn't they support it very well? It's like, oh, because it flopped and nobody liked it. And it was like, well, it flopped and nobody liked it because there weren't enough things to use it for. And it's like, well, why weren't there? It's like, well, because nobody liked it, so we didn't put any effort into it and stuff. I think one big thing, I'm probably a lot of MacBook users, I'd be in a minority here. A lot of MacBook users, I think, really value the physical function keys, especially developers I know. And I think getting rid of that for a lot of people was a big, like, whoa, like, what am I supposed to do here? I struggle without function keys, even though I don't use them very much. So if you relied on them, or if you rely even on the physical escape key, like, that is a big change and it is difficult. I really like my touch bar. I like having Siri. I like having Touch ID kind of on the end and stuff, but I think the missing physical ones is a big kind of deal breaker for a lot of people. And it's like Gerald said, the touch bar Macs are becoming less and less. We're now down to one, it is, like I said, it does feel like a very slow kind of phasing out. So it's a shame.
I think an interesting thing as well. Go on, Karen.
I have the touch bar on I have a 2018 MacBook Pro, and I really don't use it other than very basic things like adjusting the volume. But my son has virtually the same model, and he uses it a ton. It's like an integral part of his workflow, and he does not want to get rid of it. So
I
for each their own, I suppose.
Is that, like, they do, like, I think Stephen touched on something like very important in terms of like the love of the physical, the love of the tactile, right? Because for the most part, the touch bar like does offer like everything, right? It's there. It's just a touch, right? But there's something to like muscle memory and feeling around in the dark almost that it doesn't allow for, right? And I think probably one of the biggest problem with the touch bar is it's inconsistent, right? It's not, and I don't mean inconsistent as in it works well, actually maybe I do mean that. But like, if your focused tab, for instance, is the Chrome tab on your second monitor over there, and you haven't noticed that, and then you go to tap something and all of a sudden you're doing a Google search, right? Because your muscle memory wants it to be like the F5 key or whatever, like, there's nothing you can do about that. That's it's built into its design. Whereas there's something about like I think you have to like remember that like your MacBook is a tool, right? And if your hammer as a carpenter like started changing size every time you used it throughout the day, like you're gonna have a problem, right? And that's what it keeps. That's its issue.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think Steven hit the nail on the head. I think one of the reasons why, you know, it flopped with a lot of people is just like those function keys, and that top row is just so important to a lot of people's workflows, how they work, how they manage things. The fact that, you know, it is a static thing. They don't have to worry about it changing regardless of what app that they're on. I always thought that the touch bar would have been like cool if it was on top of the function keys. You know what I mean? Which I know perhaps space-wise might have been a little hard to do, but I'm sure it would have been possible if Apple wanted to do it. And that way it could have kind of been the best of both worlds, right? Keep the physical keys so the people who really want them, you can have like the touch bar be that digital presence, but then also I feel like it would have had even more of an ability for people to explore, because they would have been like, oh, okay, well, when I open this app, what does all this touch bar stuff do? If it was like different than just what the function keys do. So I think that was a big hurdle for some people to get over in their minds. And you know, just the tactile nature and the more like, you know, reliable nature of the standard keys, I think got into people's minds a little bit. Before we continue this great conversation, I'm going to throw it over to Steven so he can tell us about a sponsor of ours.
Oh, I wasn't ready. Bear with me.
So Vamp.
Sorry,
Vamp.
Karen normally does the Capital One ad reads, but she is suffering from COVID, so I agreed to step in and then forgot I had said so. Today's iMore Show is brought to you by Capital One. Have you ever hit a technical snafu shopping online? Has filling out payment fields given you a headache? Has a mobile banking app ever been down when you wanted to use it? Capital One believes everyone deserves better banking. This means easier access to their money and more security, which is why Capital One is investing in machine learning. Machine learning allows Capital One to do things like fight fraud with random forests. Models quickly detect suspicious activity and make it faster to alert federal investigators. Identify how mobile app outages happen with casual models. Keeping our mobile app up and running doesn't happen by accident. Anomaly detection and incident response help determine why app outages happen so engineers can quickly remedy them. Speed up online shopping with machine learning at the edge. This makes shopping with virtual card numbers smoother and more secure. The technology is based on logistic regression models and running inference in the browser. It identifies payment fields, which makes using virtual card numbers easier and faster. The potential of machine learning is so big. See how Capital One is using machine learning to create the future of banking. Search machine learning at Capital One. Capital One, what's in your wallet?
Thank you, Steven. And thank you, Capital One, for sponsoring this week's iMore Show. Gerald, before we just kind of wrap up our MacBook Pro talk, as we are, want to move on to a few other topics here. You gave it a 4.5. So anyone who hasn't read the review yet, go see Gerald's full review of it. But you're since we do stars on iMore, you gave it 4.5 stars out of 5. Why is that? I kind of expected you to give it a little less, but why did you go that high?
I think it's really hard to fault the 13-inch MacBook Pro, right? It's not a bad machine. The 13-inch MacBook Pros before it are not bad machines, right? Like, they're great, they're fantastic. It's just that we had sort of perhaps an expectation that, or not an expectation, because we didn't even know this was coming, right? This was kind of perhaps arguably the biggest shock of the show. It was a shock we didn't really necessarily care that much about, but we really didn't know it was coming, right? So it's still a great machine, and it's better than last year's machine. And I think we gave the last Intel 13-inch MacBook Pro 4 stars, if I'm correct.
Mm-hmm.
I'm new here, guys. So
and the M1
wrong, right?
Pro as well. The M1, the MacBook Pro as well. I think we gave them 4.
But like the quality of the M2 chip is like mad, right? It's really good. Like, it can do like insane sort of like workloads without getting hot. It's in like GPU terms, like I was running like pretty intensive like gaming benchmarks on it. I say pretty intensive, but like
for Mac,
for a Mac, right? For a Mac, and for something that isn't like designed at all as like a gaming machine, right? Like,
Right.
and it handled them. Like you could sit and play Tomb Raider on this if you really wanted to, you know, like, and it would be fine. So I think in terms of like the performance of like the M2, it's really good. And Apple has like a quality standard of like build quality, right? Like they don't like, you know, shirk expense and nice materials and stuff. And like I think it's easy to kind of, when we live in an Apple world as we do on iMore, it can be easy to forget like how good that still is, you know, because we're looking to the next thing each time. So in that respect, it's a great machine and it's better than it was last year. So yes, 8.5. Is it going to be the best MacBook in its price range this year? Even this summer? Maybe not, right? But as it stands right now, it's still a great machine, and you can only kind of review what's in front of you, right? So yeah, I think it's still definitely worth your money, and definitely worthy of a high score. But you know, we all know there's change on the horizon.
Totally. Yeah, and I think that's important for people to know, is just like, you know, when you look at a product, sometimes it's a little too easy, especially with us, to like focus out and then be like, well, there's all these other, you know, other products that are close to this product. But when it comes to reviewing, it's like, well, what does this product offer, right? Why is this product as good or as bad as we say it is? And that's one thing that, you know, even Gerald and I, you know, when he was first going through the review, I even asked him about this, and I just thought it was such a good answer of just being like, you have to kind of, with reviewing, it's weird. You have to kind of take the macro view sometimes, but you also need to focus in on the product you're actually reviewing, and not just focus on everything, all the, you know, the noise going around. So yeah, it's not that it's a bad machine. It's just, it is in a bit of a weird spot, but that doesn't make it a bad MacBook by any means.
If you're one of the 5 people who have gone out and bought one like this week, it's going to be great, right?
Yeah,
you're going to have a
totally.
lovely time. And if you're upgrading from a machine that you've had like 4 or 5 years or whatever, it's going to be like a whole new world for you.
Totally.
So yeah, you know, I think we've kind of been maybe a little down on it today because we know that there's something cool around the corner.
Yeah.
But it's still a great machine.
If you are one of the 5, please like reach out to us so we can like find out that you exist and maybe even like talk to you, because that is, like I said, we sort of, you know, we normally do like people are getting their new Apple Hero products when they arrive on release date, like today, and literally nobody, I think Sonny Dixon is the only person on Twitter who has bought one of these machines. So if you do exist, if you have bought one, get in touch, because it seems like a really interesting thing. Like you said, it's like, who is buying these machines? Like it would be a really cool piece of kind of market kind of analysis to see what's going on there.
I think it will still sell loads. I think it will still sell loads and loads for the exact same reasons that we've talked about the bottle of wine, right?
Yeah.
There's a certain type of customer who's going to go in and buy this just because it's the second notch up the ladder, you know.
And all those college students coming in with mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, they're coming in with MacBook Pro on their minds.
Yeah. And like that's the one Karen said, it's very much an iPhone SE device that people buy when they need, not at the turn of a new product. You know, like people would flock to the iPhone 14 or maybe the MacBook Air, for instance. So yeah.
Yeah, so that's the 13-inch MacBook Pro M2. It'd be interesting to see how that one pans out. As Steven said, hit us up on iMore, at iMore on Twitter. Let us know if you got one or if you don't want one. If you're waiting for the MacBook Air, maybe let us know. Moving on to just a couple rumors. One that we actually got last week but didn't have time to talk about was the 10th generation iPad. Just the base iPad is apparently to receive USB-C, 5G, and an upgrade to the A14 chip. Is that correct, Stephen?
That is correct, yes. So this is a rumor from 9to5 Mac, actually, who say, yes, this is iPad currently 9 going on 10, the very base spec iPad, the only one that still has the legacy Touch ID, forehead, chin design. We're expecting, USB-C instead of Lightning, a Retina display the same resolution as the iPad Air, and the A14 Bionic chip, which is the same chip as the previous generation iPad Air. So this is, which sounds like a pretty major overhaul. Personally, I don't care about any of that. The only thing that this iPad needs is a desperate redesign, because the old design now is so outdated. Like, I could never, I would buy one if it didn't look like this, but it does, so I won't. So yeah, give me USB-C, all of that, but we have to bring this iPad into line with the Air and the Mini, and even the iPad Mini looks okay now. The iPad Mini, the Air, the Pro. But yeah, this is possibly one of Apple's most popular tablets, I think, just purely because of the price point. So
that's the thing. I agree that, like, I would like to see it changed, but I don't want to see the price of this machine go up. I think that $329 price point is so crucial. And one thing that I care about, and I've talked about this on the show before, is that, like, tech remains accessible as possible. And accessible doesn't just mean accessibility features. It also means people being able to afford it. Tech is becoming such an integral part of our lives that it's like, I would almost argue that you can make the argument that, like, having a cell phone is like almost a basic human right at this point. Like, honestly, it's getting to that point where being connected is so crucial to our everyday lives. And like the iPad, like, I have a 9th generation iPad and I love it. I use it a lot. It's a great media device. It's a great device just for, like, whenever I just want something a little bigger than the iPhone to play around on, whether it's like I'm playing games or I'm like I'm watching Netflix or movies or whatever. It's fantastic for, it's not like the drawing tablet. Like, if you're serious about drawing, you probably want the Air or the Pro. But if you like to doodle and, like, you want to dabble around with it, you can get all those apps on the regular iPad. You have the Apple Pencil 1st generation at your disposal if you choose to buy it. And I just feel like it's such an accessible price point for a lot of people. Things could always be lower, but I'm worried that these changes mean it's going to jump, like, $100 or something like that. And I worry
think
that
the price point is important. I think the
Karen.
price point is important too, because sometimes schools will buy a whole set of them, like, for the whole school. So, that little bump in price is a big bump in price for a whole school.
There's a cost of living crisis, right? Globally at the moment, everything's getting more expensive, right? From petrol to food, like, people are feeling the squeeze. So, they'd have to keep that kind of price point alive.
Yeah.
Petrol, that's gas for those of us in America. We call it gas. No problem. I'm just translating.
We use coal in our cars in the UK.
You mean the UK isn't some futuristic, amazing hotspot where everybody has a Tesla now?
Man, you need to have spent the last few years here. It's been a while. It's been a ride.
Fair.
We couldn't get Gerald on the podcast any earlier because he didn't have a color camera to use. It was black and white until last week.
Yeah, he was still working on a what was your device? Some Windows laptop that we can make fun of. Insert Windows laptop here.
It's just all of them.
Yeah, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm curious what the next generation iPad will bring. The 10th generation of the base iPad, like I said.
Yeah.
I like hearing it's getting USB-C and 5G, and obviously, a bit of a processor upgrade is nice, but, like, what's that mean for the price? What's that mean for the design?
USB-C is a cool one as well, and I think that sort of plays into what we've heard about the general overarching shift to USB-C kind of on Apple as a whole. We started with the Pro, and then we've got the Air and the iPad Mini. The EU, and it is definitely, and possibly the US, are thinking about legislating USB-C. Now, what do you think about that? It's kind of irrelevant, but it is going to happen. We always talk about that in the context of iPhone, and I think we forget that this will also apply to iPads and even MacBooks in the more distant future. So I think Apple will have to do it at some point anyway. So whether it was planning to or not, it kind of sounds like it's in the works. But that one makes a lot of sense, especially if the iPhone and all the accessories, your Magic Mice and AirPods and such like that are going USB-C too. But yeah, I think this is probably Apple's most important iPad, because it's the one that you would buy if you'd never had an iPad before. And it's great for Apple in kind of drawing in first-time customers. So absolutely, the price continues to be pivotal for this model. So
yeah, and like you see them everywhere. Like my 91-year-old papa bought an iPad like a year ago to play his like games and to check his email. Right. And this is the iPad that he got, because why would he need anything else? Right. But he wanted he wanted a screen that was big enough that he could kind of see it and be able to interact with it with his hands that are, a little arthritis in them. But he loves the thing, right? Uses it every day to play solitaire, to check his emails, to play his games. So you see it everywhere. It's saturated the market in such a big way that I do think that price point can't get much higher. Like it might, like maybe it goes up a bit, but if it goes up like too much, then it starts being like you said, with the cost of living crisis that we're kind of facing right now all across the world, like it just becomes a much harder sell if things are just going to keep going up and up. And
I think there's maybe a little bit of room. 350, 349 is probably the magic number. I think once you go past that, it's like Gerald said about the 4 digits when you're buying a Mac. 350, I think, with this iPad, given what it's been priced previously, is like a big psychological barrier. So we'll see.
Totally. I would agree with that. And I think like if Apple did push it to like, 349 or 350, if you want to just round up, I think like that probably would still be like a decent price for what it offers. Because I always feel that the iPad's been a pretty good value proposition for like what it offers for its price compared to maybe some of the other cheaper like Galaxy tablets and stuff you find out there that can just be, to not mince words, kind of garbage when they get too cheap. It's not that there aren't good Galaxy tabs out there. It's just like some of the really cheap ones are pretty like weird and don't necessarily work the way you think that they should. So I've always thought that it's been a really good value proposition. So I hope that it doesn't go up too much. I hope that these changes don't mean that it needs to jump up a ton. Because we did see like when the new iPhone SE went up in price a little bit, presumably because of 5G. That seems to be something that it looked like, because that was really the only big difference that we could tell. So it's hard to say. It's hard to say what happened, but hopefully Apple does everything it can to keep it down. And heck, it's not like Apple couldn't afford to make a little less profit on one of its devices, most popular devices. They could definitely keep it at $329 if they want to. Lastly, one of the last rumors for this week, Steven, apparently Min-Chi Kuo thinks we're not getting a 12-inch MacBook anymore.
Yeah, a couple of people have said this. It was sort of rumored, there might be a 12-inch MacBook, and it might be it could be anything, the thinnest, most efficient laptop Apple's ever made, or like a 12-inch MacBook Pro with the M2 Pro chips and stuff like that. Multiple analysts, it was Mark Gurman at Bloomberg who said it was maybe a possibility. Lots of people have come out since and said that they don't know. Now that doesn't mean Mark Gurman is wrong or that it doesn't exist. It may be that it just takes time for these leaks and rumors to percolate, the usual sources and stuff. But there are a few people pouring cold water on the prospect of a 12-inch MacBook, which we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't had a 12-inch MacBook now for quite a few years. I can't remember exactly when they discontinued the last model. But I remember when the last model came out, I was relatively new at iMore. So it had to have been like 5-6-ish years ago. Maybe 4 at least. So it'll be interesting to see if that is brought back. It's something that I always thought, I don't know how necessary it is, especially with how great MacBook Air has gotten with the M series chips.
I've never used a 12-inch MacBook, but like that feels like tiny little ant-sized machine, right? Like
it is small.
That's not fun.
Yeah,
No.
your iPad, your 12.9-inch iPad Pro is bigger. Like would be bigger.
Yeah. But it is tremendously light, and some people do just like Apple. You remember Apple used to sell an 11-inch MacBook Air, and that was a popular. Like I knew people at school who had them, at university and stuff like that. There is a market for the smallest possible laptop you can buy that still folds in the middle, has a physical keyboard. And like it was a good device in a lot of ways. It had a Retina display, but it was also really limited. It had the terrible. Obviously, it was the first time we got the butterfly keyboard, which we all know how that finished. and it had like this Intel M-core processor that you couldn't take the skin off a rice pudding, let alone like power like a device to do things. So Apple Silicon has really reopened the door for very small, ultra power efficient and ultra portable machines. So who knows? I think that makes way more sense than a 12-inch MacBook Pro. Gerald, you said earlier in the show, if you're a pro user, you need pro workflow. Even 13 inches at a push is not enough screen real estate. So a 12-inch MacBook Pro, like, I don't think anybody's getting anything done. And that doesn't kind of make any sense.
Yeah, so. I agree. It definitely would have to be just like a MacBook, like bring back the MacBook is what they used to call it, right? It used to be the MacBook Air, and then the MacBook Pro, and then they kind of got rid of the MacBook. But if they brought that back, like Steven said, there's definitely a market for it. I used to see people in university all the time have those little ones because they want a computer. They don't want an iPad, right? They don't want a tablet experience. They still want like a full OS, Mac OS or whatever. And they want to be able to take their notes and be able to carry kind of all their important documents around with them. And that's all they need.
Yeah, that's the computer that my oldest child has. They got it in college. It got them through grad school. It does everything that they needed to do. And it's very portable. They can just throw it in a backpack and go, and it's still going strong.
What even would a MacBook be though today, right? With the Air being as powerful as it is, the Pros being like, super powerful in the top end of it. Like surely it would be the 13-inch, right? And it'd be something different again,
This is the thing because the old one was expensive too. It wasn't a cheap machine because I think they still had the 11-inch Air at the time. So it was bigger than that. It had a better display than that. So it was more expensive than even the 13-inch Air. So it was in a funny place then. And yeah, Gerald's right. Like I think it would be an even stranger place now. Like we're already talking about this 13-inch M2 MacBook Pro that doesn't really make any sense. So do we need more MacBook sizes and different? I don't know.
You start looking at things like Stage Manager on iPad as well, right? And those kind of use cases and people who would have wanted these kind of different sizes and different price points, like the computing world is different now. You can get your fix from different sorts of devices. It doesn't always have to be like just a different size laptop anymore, right? So like, I really don't know what a MacBook, not MacBook Air, not MacBook Pro, a MacBook would look like today. Like it's almost like a thought experiment. Like what do you take out? What do you put in? Like I don't know.
I agree. I don't know if it would ever happen, and if it does happen, I'm not sure where it fits. And like the only thing I can think of, and this is something that is always kind of in my mind, so maybe this is just me, but like if they did just like make it this super cheap model, like to sort of capture maybe some of that budget, budget going to school, I need to take notes kind of crowd. But yeah, other than that, like where would it fit? Where would it make sense? What would it offer that, or what wouldn't it offer, I guess would be the real question. What wouldn't it have compared to the other lineup? That is an interesting thought experiment. And I don't know if anybody will know the answer. I don't know if there is one answer. Very quickly, if you follow Captain America, aka Chris Evans, on Twitter today, we've been talking a lot about old devices. He apparently just retired his iPhone 6S. You can go to Chris Evans' Twitter and see his goodbye post to his beloved iPhone. I thought this was just so funny because, first of all, Captain America would definitely have a phone that's really old. That is probably done. He'd probably still have a flip phone. I'm trying to remember if he ever uses a phone in the movies and what it was, but I can't remember. But he
had an iPhone 10 in Defending Jacob on Apple TV Plus, so they didn't let him keep that, which is pretty funny.
Yeah, that is kind of funny. But it's interesting. It's interesting that when you think of a celebrity, you'd think that they probably have the latest and greatest all the time. But here he is, just recently retiring his iPhone 6S. And
do you know what's funny about this? If you've not read if you've not read the tweet, I don't know when the 6S came out. I can't remember what year it was, but it's like, it's not like it was doing well and then it suddenly took a turn. He literally lists like all the things he won't miss, and it's like when the battery goes from 100% to 15% to dead, all within minutes. So it sounds like his phone has been fighting for its life for like 2 years already, and he's literally run it into the ground, and it's only when it so it wasn't like, like I would upgrade a phone where it's like, it's just like a little bit slow. It's like, I think my iPhone 13 Pro is only refreshing at 116 hertz, not 120. Time for an upgrade. Whereas Chris Evans, it's just like, he
probably doesn't really use it. He's probably surrounded by people who have
probably
more
pays someone to use a phone for him.
Yeah.
That's what I would do
if I was running his Twitter account, and
you would have to pay me a pretty good salary to still use an iPhone 6S, I think.
It does go to show though, right, that like, I think we can assume that like Chris Evans isn't wanting for cash, right? but like the things that kind of like matter to your average consumer, even Captain America as your average consumer, isn't always what we think of as like the cutting edge, right? Like people have stuff that they hang on to for a long time, and unless
people
you're
get
particularly
attached.
like, and unless you're particularly like
attached to their phones, they don't want to change.
People was like, I have friends who are still fearful of like, if they lose their phone, they lose their photos, right? Because they've not got them backed up somewhere and all that kind of stuff. So like, there's more to it than just like the latest hardware. Guys, I'm gonna have to love you and leave you, I'm afraid.
That's okay.
This is the end for me.
Yeah, it's almost the end for us. You're gonna miss the last little portion, but we'll let it slide this time, Gerald. Thank you so much for joining us on the iMore show. We hope to have you around more often as you get kind of up and running and getting us all your ducks, which I guess are us, in line.
So many ducks.
But thanks for coming along, and we'll see you later.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. It's nice to be a part of it. I'll catch you all soon.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Luke, is it time for back to school?
Yes. Right before the end of the show, Apple has launched its official back to school promotion this year, which can include up to 150. That's 150 in gift cards, depending on what you buy. Stevus, why don't you run us quickly through what the offer is?
Yeah, it also depends kind of where you live. So we'd heard maybe at the start of the week the rumblings that back to school usually happens about this time of year, but the free headphones of previous years maybe were off the table and it was going to be a gift card instead. And I was like, oh, that's a bit rubbish. And I was like, well, it depends how much the gift card is, and because if it's worth the same or more as AirPods, then great. But if not, we'll see. So the promotion has gone live today. There are places where it is still AirPods. Some Asian countries, Singapore, Thailand, India, AirPods are still on offer, but definitely in the US and Canada, which is where a lot of our reader and listenership will be hailing from. The offer is now a free gift card, either $100 if you buy an iPad or $150 if you buy a Mac. Now that's on top of, you get an education discount on the price of a Mac. It's usually about 10%. And you also get a pretty decent saving of 20% of Apple Care Plus for either the Mac or the iPad, depending on which one you go for.
Yeah. They've done free AirPods for a few years now, but now they've kind of switched over, like we said, here in the Americas, they've switched over to the gift cards. So we thought we would quickly tell you, if we were going back to school, which I don't think any of us are. I think we're past the school day. But if we were, what would we get? What would we get? And then what would we get with the accompanying gift card? So I'll let Karen start us off.
Let me go last as well, because I still haven't figured mine out.
Okay.
Well, I would get the MacBook Air in the color Starlight, which with the education discount is down to $10.99 with the M2 chip. And I would still get AirPods. It's just I would have to think hard about whether I would want to get the AirPod, the second generation, which would be $129. So that would be covered, I guess, with sales tax, and it would pretty much break even with a $150 gift card. Or take the upgrade and maybe do the AirPods 3, which would cost an extra, like $30, or the Beats Fit Pro, which would be like an extra $50. So, when else do you have an opportunity to get the higher end AirPods for such a small amount of money? So that's my thinking. What would you guys do?
Yeah, so I would, just because I'm thinking of when I did go to college, I was in a bit more of a creative program, and so I think I think I would actually opt for the iPad Air 5. I think having the M1, and then when it launches in the fall, you'll have access to like Stage Manager and stuff. I think if you're in a bit more of a creative type field, you like drawing, you like to be able to have kind of that power and portability, and you don't necessarily need your laptop, because maybe you have a laptop sitting around already like for taking notes, but you want something like a little fancier for maybe some more creative work. I would actually go with the iPad Air 5, and then with the $100 gift card, I would get a HomePod Mini, which would mostly cover there'd be some taxes and stuff, but it would mostly cover the HomePod Mini cost. And whether you want to throw that in your dorm room, if you have a dorm room, you want to throw that in your dorm room and just have a really decent small quality speaker, so you can stay up late at night cramming for your next exam, listening to all those hip hop beats that you love. Or
you could terrorize a dorm block with a HomePod Mini. It is a lot louder than it looks. So,
yeah, it's true. You wouldn't need to turn it that loud. Or if if you're living at home or wherever in your apartment or your room, and you just want something to a little smart speaker, can message your friends. If you have it hooked up to your iPhone, it can message your friends for you, so you can keep typing while you're talking to your friends. Or there's just like so many little uses that I feel like you can use it for, and it would just be so good, and it would just fit anywhere because it's so small, and you essentially get it for free with the gift card offered. So that's what I would do. I would get the HomePod Mini.
Interesting. I've had to think about this. You've got two great portable options, so I'm going to go with a desktop option. So I would take the M1 iMac, 24 inches, which I believe starts in the education store at, is it 14? No, that's too expensive. I was going to say 14,448. It's not. It's 12,499 on the education store. And then I would add, I only discovered this today, and this is really cool. And again, this is a little bit of a rogue option, but it's Apple's Pro Apps bundle for education. Now, if you don't know what this is, this includes Final Cut Pro, so video editing, Motion for creating motion graphics, Compressor, which is an encoding and exporting tool for Final Cut Pro, Logic Pro for music creation, and MainStage for live performance using virtual instruments. You can add that to a Mac in the education store for $199. And the gift card is $150 of that dollars. Now, in terms of logistics of how you would do that, because I don't think you get the gift card until after you've bought the Mac. So the value is there, but you'll have to figure out the logistics for yourself. That is an incredible bundle deal. I'm pretty sure Apple sells these products for $200 each. The big three, the big ones, your Final Cut and your Logic Pro, those are usually about a $200 extra upgrade on a Mac if you just bought it normally. So to be getting all of this in an education bundle for $200 is phenomenal. So if you're a creative type and you're about to go to university, or you're in your second, third year of college or whatever, if you're wanting to get into music production or making videos, this isn't a way that you can access all of Apple's kind of amazing creative tools for that for a very, very reasonable price. But I think on the whole, like I said, I was a bit surprised when it was like gift cards, not AirPods. And I was like, that stinks. Actually, I've come around. I think this is a way better way to do it, because the great thing about the gift card is, first of all, you can buy anything you want, right? So if you already had AirPods, if someone bought you AirPods for Christmas and then you're going back to school, that offer's kind of worthless to you. Whereas a $150 gift card, you can do whatever you like with it. You can also choose not to spend it. So previously, you would get your AirPods or your Beats with your purchase, or if you wanted to make like an upgrade, you would have to kind of pay on the day. With this, you can take your gift card away and you can decide, I'll see how I go, and maybe I will buy a HomePod, or maybe I will come back and get the AirPods and stuff like that. Equally as well, if you want to use the cash for something completely different, you have a $150 voucher that you can exchange with someone for equal or maybe slightly less monetary value, and you can spend it on some trainers or something like that. So I have completely come around to the gift card back to school offer. I think it's great.
Yeah, another fun option if you're buying an iPad is an Apple Pencil.
Yep.
Yeah, totally.
Which, depending which model you're getting, it's either going to cover all of it or most of it.
Yeah.
How much is the keyboard? What does a Magic Keyboard set you back?
The Magic Keyboard is fairly expensive, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I feel like it's like close to 200, but I could be wrong. Yeah. I can't remember now.
Interesting. The price doesn't actually show up on the 119 for the pencil. So you'd have to pay 19 of your own dollars.
Right.
279. Oh yeah, you don't put tax.
The Magic Keyboard is $279 for the 11-inch or $329 for the 12.9-inch.
Yeah. I tried to buy some underwear in Montreal once, and I thought I was getting a really good deal. And then I took it to the cashier,
and
they scanned it all, and the price changed. As a British person, I found that incredibly offensive. I've never understood why in America land and Canada you don't put the tax in the. So is the iPad Air not $549 in the US? Is it more?
I mean, there will be sales tax on it, and how much will depend on what state you're in.
Yeah,
it varies from state to state,
or province to province if you're up here in the Great White North.
Maybe just use a gift card to pay your sales taxes. Then how about that?
Yeah, that is funny. I mean, I've never been to Europe yet. I hope to get there at some point, but I also don't understand why over here we don't have the taxes included. Like, why not just put that in the price? I don't really understand. I also don't I mean, in Canada we do. I also don't understand how the state still uses the imperial system, but Stephen and I can talk more about that.
We're trying to bring that back. Don't worry, that'll be.
Are you trying to bring it back?
Apparently somebody is. Yeah, but we need a whole nother show to talk about that. So.
Oh my goodness. First,
yes, we should wrap this one up. And
first Brexit, then the Imperial Empire comes back. Okay. What a weird time over there. That is our show today. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. If you've joined us live, we really appreciate the comments. You kicking it with the show with us. If you're listening to this in your podcatcher of choice, not live, you're listening to us after. We love you. Thank you so much. If you ever want to talk to us about anything, hit us up at iMore on Twitter or at iMoregram on Instagram, and tell us what you're liking about your devices. What would you like us to talk about? We're always open for suggestions. Thank you to Jim Metzendorf, our audio editor, who always makes us sound so good. Thank you, Karen and Stephen and Gerald, even though he had to take off and he wasn't here. But thank you for joining me this week, and we'll see you all next week. Have a good one.
Goodbye. Bye.